Trump's favor for that reason. On the other hand, you got Democrats like Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen and others who are planning to keep up the pressure. I think it raises a really profound question here about, do you accept and follow public opinion? Do you fight to shape it? Waleed Shahid is a veteran Democratic strategist. Patrick Gaspard is a former executive director of the DNC, and they join me now. There was a lot of consternation about the Gavin Newsom comment yesterday, which I think was not well stated, if I had to say. But I do think there is a kind of interesting and profound point here, right? Which is like, they do have the only thing he's positive on is immigration. The cost of living, tariff stuff, he's underwater on. Yeah. They do seem to relish and want to have this fight, right? At the same time, like, it's kind of a fight you got to have if you believe in human decency in the country. But what do you think?
Yeah, you know, defending us from a slide to dictatorship is not a distraction. Donald Trump is literally pulling people off of the streets, off of college campuses, off of communities, and without any due process whatsoever, not only deporting them, but sending them to gulags in other countries. And he has said publicly that he's prepared to do this to American citizens as well. So yeah, no, it's not a distraction to like put your 10 toes down and to fight that fight. And guess what? Polling is interesting. It's always just a snapshot of the exact moment that you are in. And I know that there are many consultants whispering in the ears of Democratic governors and senators and Congress members about the price of eggs. But you actually don't get to pick the fight the field that you get to play on. You got to fight the thing in front of you. And when we're moving towards DEFCON 1 on a constitutional crisis, you got to lean in hard.
Let me, one tiny factual amendation is just that he hasn't taken any students off college campuses and sent them to CCOT.
Yes.
Yet. I just want to be clear, because you said college students. So no college students have been sent there. What do you think, Waleed?
This isn't a distraction, it's a test. And like the argument that Democrats are having now in Washington is the most Democratic Party play of all time, which is that when someone is being abducted in defiance of the Supreme Court, we're arguing about what our strategy is for an election 930 days
right.
from now.
That's the thing. That's the thing. It's like no one's who knows what anyone remembers? Like
it is like arguing about your fantasy football team when your house is on fire. Right. That's the equivalent. Like we have a chance to.
Or arguing about your 2026 fantasy team. Like even that, it doesn't make any sense.
And so we have a chance right now to do something about a man who's being unlawfully held in a gulag and bring him home to his family, and that's what this fight is about now.
And it's not just that single man. Let's be really clear. As 60 Minutes has demonstrated, the New York Times has demonstrated, we have literally no sense of what the charges are against the hundreds of other people who've been picked up and said. We are taking Donald Trump's word for it. Donald Trump's word. This makes no sense.
And in fact, one of the things I think that is worthwhile remembering, and again, I do think it's important to be clear-eyed about where the public has been on immigration. Like there has been a reactionary mood among the public on immigration. I think that's true. I think it's inarguable, in fact. What we saw during Donald Trump's first term was a kind of move against, the public became more pro-immigrant than it had been in a long time in reaction to the sort of deprivations. And I think part of the way that I see this here is that actually there's a contestable public here on these questions. And if you tell people that there's a 23-year-old guy who came from Venezuela who's working in a bakery who's got an autism awareness tattoo, who's now in a prison he can't get out of, most Americans are not okay with that.
Yeah, well, that's been demonstrated in all of the public data and the outcry that we're seeing even in Republican districts as Republican Congress members and senators go and they get accosted on this question, right? But there's also the reality, Chris, that Democrats had to just be caught leading. We didn't have a messaging problem in immigration. We had a policy problem, right? Broken asylum system. We weren't seen to be doing a thing on it. We've started to lean in, and that makes a difference. But now, Chris Van Hollen is caught leading on this issue. Senator Booker, caught leading. Bernie Sanders and AOC are being caught leading, litigating, and having the fights with this administration. You can't just step back and say, this is a distraction.
Let me just play. I want to play for you, Waleed. I love this moment with Senator Grassley in Iowa with one of his constituents on this. It was just sort of, because again, you can sort of like you can overgeneralize about like what normal people think, but there's hundreds of millions of normal people, right? So people have different views. Take a listen to this.
Are you going to bring that guy back from El Salvador? Why not?
Well, because that's not a power of Congress.
Supreme Court said to bring him back.
I just love the Midwesterner sitting there growling at his senator like, you gonna bring that guy back from El Salvador?
This is what all these law firms and universities and media platforms, banks, like this is the kind of stuff that they need to be seeing. This is why these protests are helpful, because it helps tell them who are they in defiance of, not just of, they shouldn't just fear Donald Trump, but they should fear public opinion when they kowtow and capitulate to Donald Trump. And honestly, this messaging thing is much more simple than I think some of the pundits are making it seem. The tariffs and the deportations, the abductions that are happening are part of the same story, that this president does not care about you. He is not lowering your prices, he's not lowering your groceries, he's not lowering your rent.
Right, where's his focus?
He's focused on defying the Supreme Court and building a mafia-like state for himself and his friends, like a corrupt politician in El Salvador, to use the government as his own state, as his own way to make money and power off of the government.
And that regular guy with his Midwestern twang knows that this is just one story about seizing power and Donald Trump's interest, not the American interest. He knows it's one story, and Senator Grassley is going to learn to appreciate that in the midterms.
I think there's also quickly a little useful recent history here, which is the Bush administration's use of sort of legal extremism and the war on terror, right? Where in the beginning it was Democrats are like, they're terrorists and Gitmo and you can't advocate for them. And people like Barack Obama found a way to make a case that due process mattered, that actually resonated with the public. And it took a while, but I do think there's a little bit of precedent there.
Yeah, that's right. It is the Guantanamo story. And it's interesting, in the Bush administration, they bent over backwards to not get a Supreme Court ruling, right?
Yes,
they did not want to be seen to be in defiance of the Supreme Court. These folks are inviting the contest with the Supreme Court because they've already been told that anything the president does has an imperial immunity, and they want to test the bounds of that.
Yeah, and I do
so
think
it's not a distraction to push into that fight.
And I do think there's public opinion consequences for that if
100%.
we get to that point. Waleed Shahid and Patrick Gaspar, great to have you both.
Thank you.
That is all in on this Thursday night. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Chris. Thanks, my friend. Much appreciated. And thanks to you at home for joining us here this hour. Very, very happy to have you here. Today is April 17th. This is the Old North Church in Boston, Massachusetts. When I say it is the Old North Church, I mean really old. The Old North Church is famous for something that happened in 1775. But in 1775, when that thing happened, the Old North Church was already old then. It was already more than 50 years old by that point. It was the venerable old landmark and, importantly, very tall building where the rebels had arranged in advance to use their code. They had arranged in advance that at the Old North Church, they would hoist either one or two lanterns into the steeple of that church, and that would be the code. That would be the coded signal. If it was one lantern, that would mean the British troops were coming by land. If it was two lanterns, that would mean they were coming by sea, or at least by water. On the night of April 18th, 1775, they hung two lanterns in that steeple. That was the signal that the British troops were indeed on the move and that they were not moving their troops into position for an attack by land. They were instead taking the more direct route toward Lexington and Concord by sea or by water. They were crossing the Charles River in boats. That's what the two lanterns meant. Once the rebels had figured out what the British were up to, once that two-lantern warning was hoisted, those in the know knew that it was time to move. Paul Revere and William Dawes, and later Samuel Prescott, they rode off into the night pell-mell on fast horses because it was their job to go sound the alarm, to go convey the warning, to stand up the defense. And when the dawn arrived, when the next morning arrived, when the British troops arrived in Lexington, Massachusetts that next morning, there was a welcoming party. There was the American militia, forewarned, forearmed, and ready to fight them. And what happened at Lexington and Concord were, of course, the first shots, right? And that was the start. And on that first day, the forewarned, forearmed, prepared militia's success against the British, that first day, it soon swelled the ranks of the militia to thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans who literally took up arms to throw off the tyrant king. And of course, they won. And that's how we got here. And tomorrow marks 250 years to the day since the two-lantern signal was hoisted into the steeple of the Old North Church in Boston, Massachusetts. At 6 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Old North Church in Boston, and churches and other houses of worship all over the country, and just regular people, regular Americans, are going to ring bells 6 p.m. Eastern tomorrow to mark this moment in our history. The day after tomorrow, on Saturday, that, of course, is the anniversary of what happened at dawn the morning after Paul Revere's ride, right? That is, this Saturday is the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, where America took its first radical, literally revolutionary steps to free ourselves from tyranny and establish ourselves as a democracy. This Saturday, April 19th, on that 250th anniversary, we are expecting another day with potentially thousands of peaceful protests at state capitals all over the country. We're expecting protests this Saturday very much along the lines of what we saw 2 weeks ago on Saturday, April 5th. And you might remember the theme, the sort of banner under which those protests were organized 2 weeks ago, that was hands off. This weekend, this Saturday, perhaps inevitably, given the anniversary of the start of the American Revolutionary War, this Saturday, the banner for this weekend's peaceful protests will be No Kings. No Kings, national protest, April 19th. No Kings. This weekend, this Saturday, perhaps inevitably, given the anniversary of the start of the American Revolutionary War, this Saturday, the banner for this weekend's peaceful protests will be No Kings. No Kings, national protest, April 19th. No Kings protests are expected, I believe, in all 50 states this weekend. Yet again, we are expecting thousands and thousands and thousands, likely hundreds of thousands of Americans to protest altogether this weekend in every state in the country. Yet again, against our century's Old North Church moment, right? Organizing our own efforts against the attempted authoritarian takeover of the United States government in our century, Americans figuring out what they can do. And of course, we are seeing protests every day, every day. I mean, these big days of protests like April 5th and this weekend, April 19th, but this was Augusta, Maine yesterday. Just on Wednesday. This was Augusta, Maine, farmers protesting against Trump's massive cuts to USDA funding and programs. And, you know, farmers are busy, very busy people, particularly this time of year. Anytime farmers are protesting, it's kind of a thing. You can see that tractor there, the sign on the front of it says, "Weed out the fascists. Support farmers, not billionaires." That was Augusta, Maine. This was San Diego, California yesterday. People protesting against cuts to the VA, cuts to services for veterans, including lots of nurses out there protesting cuts to the VA from the Trump administration. This was South Dakota yesterday, outside an event where South Dakota Republican Senate leader John Thune was speaking. People had tape over their mouths at this protest, protesting John Thune's silence in the face of Donald Trump's destruction of the U.S. government and increasing defiance of the U.S. Constitution. Red state South Dakota yesterday. This was today in Washington. This was very dramatic. These are coffins, full-size black coffins, being piled up outside the headquarters of the U.S. State Department. They brought 200 adult-sized coffins and 6 baby-sized coffins, each of which represents 100,000 people who may die because of what Secretary of State Marco Rubio and President Donald Trump did to the decades-old, wildly successful PEPFAR program, which was providing HIV medications to literally 20 million people around the world. And, you know, you can live a long, full life while HIV positive if you receive antiretroviral drugs to keep the virus suppressed in your body. But President Donald Trump ended those treatments mid-course for 20 million HIV positive people by cutting off that program with no warning. And there's no substitution for PEPFAR. There's nothing like PEPFAR except PEPFAR. And Trump and Marco Rubio killed it, even while trying to say they weren't. And those antiretroviral medications have been cut off all over the world. And so these coffins today represent the death toll of this decision that they have made, of what they have done. Legendary U.S. AIDS activist Peter Staley conceived this protest today.
When I heard that just 2 weeks after Trump became president, that Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, decided to shut down USAID and PEPFAR, the best international foreign aid program ever launched by the U.S. since we rebuilt Europe after World War II. I knew that 20 million lives were now at risk. 20 million people with HIV around the world who were showing up to get their HIV meds refilled and finding the clinic doors shut, which happened immediately. I just couldn't sleep. And I thought, it's like, does President Trump realize what Musk is about to do to his legacy? That he's going to relaunch the AIDS crisis around the world with millions and millions of more infections and deaths? I'm still not sure he does. And we're already seeing those deaths. And they're now estimated that it'll be 5 million deaths before 2030. 5 million deaths in 5 years. That's a Holocaust. It's just mind-numbingly frightening.
That was today in Washington. Again, those hundreds of coffins brought and stacked up outside the U.S. State Department in protest of what the Trump administration has done to that program. That was today in Washington. This was from the federal courthouse today in Richmond, Virginia, the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. I will read to you from this ruling. Quote, "It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter, but in this case it is not hard at all. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims in essence that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear. The government asserts that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident of its position, it should be assured that that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Moreover, the government has conceded that Abrego Garcia was wrongly or, quote, mistakenly deported. Why then should it not make what was wrong right? Quote, the Supreme Court's decision remains, as always, our guidepost. The decision rightly requires the lower federal courts to give due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. The Supreme Court's decision does not, however, allow the government to do essentially nothing. It requires the government to, quote, facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent there. Facilitate is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken, as the Supreme Court has made perfectly clear. Facilitation does not permit the admittedly erroneous deportation of an individual in disregard of a court order that the government not so subtly spurns. Facilitation does not sanction the abrogation of habeas corpus through the transfer of custody to foreign detention centers in the manner attempted here. Allowing this would, quote, facilitate foreign detention more than it would domestic return. It would reduce the rule of law to lawlessness and tarnish the very values for which Americans of diverse views and persuasions have always stood. The government is obviously frustrated and displeased with the rulings of the court. Let one thing be clear. Court rulings are not above criticism. Criticism keeps us on our toes and helps us do a better job. Court rulings can overstep, and they can further intrude upon the prerogatives of other branches. Courts thus speak with the knowledge of their imperfections, but also with the sense that they instill a fidelity to law that would be sorely missed in their absence. If today the executive branch claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, What assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary powers upon its political enemies? The threat, even if not the actuality, would always be present, and the executive's obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed would lose its meaning. Today, both the U.S. and El Salvadoran governments disclaim any authority and or responsibility to return Mr. Abrego Garcia. We are told that neither government has the power to act. The result will be to leave matters generally, and Mr. Abrego Garcia specifically, in an interminable limbo without recourse to law of any sort. The basic differences between the branches mandate a serious effort at mutual respect. The respect that courts must accord the executive must be reciprocated by the executive's respect for the courts. Too often today, this has not been the case, as calls for impeachment of judges for decisions the executive disfavors and exhortations to disregard court orders sadly illustrate. Now the branches come too close to grinding irrevocably against one another in a conflict that promises to diminish both. This is a losing proposition all around. The judiciary will lose much from the constant intimations of its illegitimacy, to which by dint of custom and detachment we can only sparingly reply. But the executive will lose much from a public perception of its lawlessness and all of its attendant contagions. The executive may succeed for a time in weakening the courts, but over time history will script the tragic gap between what was and all that might have been. And law, in time, will sign its epitaph. It is, as we have noted, all too possible to see in this case an incipient crisis. But it may present an opportunity as well. We yet cling to the hope that it is not naive to believe our good brethren in the executive branch perceive the rule of law as vital to the American ethos. This case presents their unique chance to vindicate that value and to summon the best that is within us while there is still time. While there is still time. That ruling today written by a high-profile conservative judge on the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. In case it's not obvious, the point of that ruling is to deny the Trump administration what it was asking for, which was an emergency stay to let them avoid what the courts have thus far very plainly ordered them to do. This ruling on the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, in which the Trump administration has been ordered to bring him back to the U.S., this that I just read you, this comes on the heels, of course, of yesterday's ruling that it's not just Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Trump administration has been ordered to retake U.S. custody of all these guys, of the hundreds of men who the Trump administration sent to El Salvador for potentially life imprisonment without any court's adjudication as to their fate inside the United States. Remarkable rulings these last 2 days, particularly this ruling tonight from the Fourth Circuit. But I just want to say, in the spirit of Paul Revere tonight, I just want to note that the courts are not riding alone here. This stuff does not happen in a vacuum. You ask scholars of authoritarianism and dictatorship, and they will tell you that it's never just one thing that works in terms of resistance. It's everything together. And in our country, specifically on this issue at the sort of sharp end of the stick here on immigration, we really are seeing all kinds of resistance and strategic refusal and sounding the alarm all happening all at once, and it is mutually reinforcing. When you start seeing it come from all directions, it feeds on itself. It gains momentum. It gets bigger. And right now, it is everywhere. It is in the courts. It is also in communities. It is in civic life. It is in political life. It is in the press. And it is in the streets. And I mean that all very specifically and literally. This is St. Paul, Minnesota, yesterday, outside the consulate of El Salvador in St. Paul. People in the streets lining both sides of the road demanding that the Trump administration follow the court's orders and bring back Kilmar Abrego Garcia and bring back these men who they have shipped to that foreign prison. This was Santa Rosa, California yesterday. Local clergy leading a rally in support of immigrants and against what Trump is doing. This was Denver, Colorado yesterday. Again, local clergy leading a protest, a rally in support of immigrants and against the Trump administration's treatment of immigrants. This was Grand Rapids, Michigan yesterday. Local people protesting against Trump administration plans to open an immigration prison, a so-called detention facility in their community. This was New Orleans yesterday, people protesting at ICE headquarters in New Orleans, Louisiana. These students yesterday protesting against how they're going against immigrants and international students at Kennesaw State, in Cobb County, Georgia, and in Newark, Delaware at the University of Delaware. When the Trump administration took a young man who's a legal permanent resident named Mohsen Maddow in Vermont this week, the community where he lives, where he is absolutely integrated into that community, they sprung into action. They were worried that Trump's agents were going to come for him. His friends and supporters had created a text group called Mohsen Just in Case to prepare a support plan, a network, a communication in case it happened. They were with him when the arrest happened. They made sure to film it, to make sure that it was posted on social media, that they alerted the press. They had prepared for the worst with lawyers who had prepped in advance legal motions to stop him being removed from Vermont and flown to one of these immigration dungeons, for lack of a better word, 1,000 miles away in Louisiana or somewhere. And because they had those prepped in time, those motions worked. A judge was able to order him kept in Vermont while he was still in Vermont before they had time to spirit him off elsewhere. Vermonters have since been protesting at the prison where he is being held in their state. Mr. Maddow is Palestinian. He was born and raised in the West Bank. They brought Palestinian flags to show their support for him. And they banged drums and yelled as loud as they could in the hopes that he could hear them inside the prison. Now in Vermont, the Democratic leadership in the state legislature says they want to terminate their state's contract with the federal government to keep immigration prisoners, immigration so-called detainees in the state's prisons, in their own facilities. That's Vermont. In Raleigh, North Carolina, the Trump administration has just sent notice to 24 Christians who fled Afghanistan when the Taliban took that country back over. They are legally here in this country. They were given legal permission to stay here for obvious reasons. For not obvious reasons, Donald Trump is now taking that away and telling these Afghan Christians that they have to return immediately to the tender mercies of the Taliban right now, this week. It is a Christian church in Raleigh, North Carolina that's advocating for them.
At the Apostles Church in Raleigh, there's a community of Afghans, many going through the same thing. Pastor Nick Kaminsky says the church has organized resources to help asylum seekers navigate the process.
It's a very personal issue. These are individuals, men, women, children that we know and have come to know and love.
That's Raleigh, North Carolina. In Utah, it's people who are legally here from Haiti and Venezuela, who are part of the community that they live in Utah, who are beloved there. Their neighbors in Utah are stepping up to help them and also to sound the alarm.
It's time for you to leave the United States. That's the first line of a letter from the Department of Homeland Security to several refugee families here in Utah legally. News specialist Dan Rascone is covering this story and joins us live. Dan, this has left neighbors shocked and upset.
It really has, Deanie. That's exactly right. Shocked, upset, angry, and also heartbroken that several of these families got this letter from the Department of Homeland Security telling them they got to be out of this country by the end of the week.
I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm embarrassed.
Emotions running high.
It's not right. It's inhumane.
For this group of neighbors in Mill Creek.
We love them and they love us.
Gathered together to fight for 3 refugee families.
I feel sad, really sad.
That arrived in the U.S. and in their area not long ago. All of them getting this letter from the Department of Homeland Security saying, quote, "It's time for you to leave the United States. Your parole will terminate in 7 days."
Unimaginable. The government that we love would do this to people we love.
Honestly, feel like family to us.
2 of the families are from Venezuela, the other from Haiti, all too scared to identify themselves.
The letter said that I was supposed to leave.
This mother from Haiti has a 2-year-old daughter.
I was in shock because I wasn't expected something like that to happen because I came here legally.
Attorney Jim McConkey with the Refugee Justice League is helping the families get representation.
We're dealing with a group of people that are here legally. And the letters that were sent intentionally are designed to bully and mislead these people into believing that they don't have rights.
That's Utah. That's Mill Creek, Utah. those neighbors standing up for their neighbors who have been taken. It's protests, it's community life, it's also civic life. These students at Harvard today rallying to support international students at Harvard, who the Trump administration is threatening as a group, threatening en masse. As their own university, one of the highest profile and most prestigious universities in the world, takes a firm stand against the administration and says they will not accede to Trump's demands. We're going to have more on that coming up in just a moment. But you know what? If you look just outside Harvard Yard, if you look at the hometown press in Boston, you will see not only standing ovation level support for Harvard choosing to wage that fight, you will also see in the biggest local paper, the Boston Globe, you'll see them today leading with a brand new investigative piece into these vigilante groups that have been claiming credit for feeding individual student names to the Trump administration for the administration to then target those people for arrest and deportation. The Globe's investigation today reviewed a so-called students deport list from one of these groups. Quote, it sometimes placed students at the wrong universities or featured people who were not even in the United States. One woman on the list was pictured wearing a hijab and identified as a Harvard student from Nigeria who had already been detained in Massachusetts. The group claimed she should be deported because her visa had been revoked in March for a pro-Hamas rally speech. Contacted by the Globe, the woman said she has never attended a pro-Hamas rally, she has never attended Harvard, and in fact, she has never visited the United States. An hour south in New Bedford, Massachusetts, the local NBC station, Channel 10, has dug into this horrifying video in which ICE agents smashed through the window of a car to drag a man and a woman out of the vehicle. They report that the ICE agents repeatedly, while they were doing this, referred to the man in the car as Antonio. They insisted that that was what his name, and it was Antonio who they were looking for. Nobody in that car was named Antonio. It really does appear to be a case of mistaken identity. Local press has been covering it intensely, while ICE is defending its conduct by saying whether or not he's Antonio, the man was not in the country legally, and so, you know. The New Republic was first to report that one of the police officers responsible for the disputed gang designation for Kilmar Abrego Garcia appears to have himself been soon thereafter suspended from the police force for serious misconduct in an unrelated matter, which of course goes to a police officer's credibility on a matter like this. USA Today was first to report that in the case of the gay makeup artist who the Trump administration sent to El Salvador, potentially for life in prison, his supposed gang affiliation was due to a single officer with a history of serious credibility and disciplinary problems, including driving his car into a family's home while intoxicated, after which he was summarily fired. Now we've got increasing press coverage of the Trump administration sending get out of the country immediately letters to at least 3 U.S. citizens, 2 of whom are lawyers in Massachusetts and one of whom is a random doctor in Connecticut. All of them American citizens, all inexplicably told by the Trump administration that they must get out of the country within a week. And all of this press coverage, while it's depressing because of the subject matter, it is also incisive investigative press coverage. And it does have the effect of exposing the shambolic and slapdash and utterly incompetent behavior of the Trump administration as it embarks on this cruel and unconstitutional adventure for which it wants to be feared and respected. And instead they look ridiculous and cruel in equal measure. And that has the effect of shaping public opinion about what they're doing. And that fuels not just protests, and lots of them, but also lawsuits. Reuters reporting that on Tuesday alone this week, federal judges in at least 7 states issued orders blocking the Trump administration from acting against international students that it is trying to arrest. Lawsuits in Massachusetts, Montana, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., New Hampshire, Michigan, everywhere, and more filed every single day. Those legal roadblocks tend to turn up information. The tide of incisive investigative press about what the administration is doing turns up yet more information about what Trump is doing and who he's hurting. And all of that information builds the public case, further galvanizes more public opinion against them and more protest against them. And you know what? If you keep eventually going like this stuff snowballs and it builds on itself. And eventually you are going to embolden elected officials. to make them believe that it is time they better take action. And eventually you are going to end up with a U.S. senator in El Salvador himself trying to get his constituent out of there. And on that front, we have breaking news tonight. Just as we are getting on the air tonight, we have learned that Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, has been able to meet with imprisoned Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The government of El Salvador posting 3 photos online of the senator meeting with Mr. Abrego Garcia a short time later. Senator Van Hollen confirming that he did have a chance to meet with his constituent. He said, quote, "I said my main goal of this trip was to meet with Kilmar. Tonight I had that chance. I've called his wife, Jennifer, to pass along his message of love. I look forward to providing a full update upon my return." It is unclear where that meeting took place. It is unclear what Mr. Abrego Garcia's current status is. We are working on getting more information from Senator Van Hollen's office. We will bring it to you as we get it. But no, none of these things on their own is enough. But all of them together are really something. And all of them together just might be enough, right? 1 of by land, 2 of by sea. Fast horses, a relay of riders to alert everybody along the way, everybody ready to do their part. We've had 250 years of training for this. We know what to do.
Wow, looks like your hiring's making a lot of people happy.
Has now sent Harvard University a letter threatening every single international student who attends Harvard. There are thousands of them. The university responded by acknowledging receipt of the letter and saying that it, quote, follows on the heels of our statement that Harvard will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. We continue to stand by that statement. We will continue to comply with the law, and we expect the administration to do the same. Joining us now is Professor Stephen Levitsky of Harvard. He's the co-author of Tyranny of the Minority, Why American Democracy Reached the Breaking Point. He's also co-author of the sadly topical blockbuster bestseller, How Democracies Die. Professor Levitsky, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you making time.
Thanks for having me.
So on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolution, I feel like Americans are feeling like we're in our own revolutionary or counter-revolutionary moment right now. One of the things that was implicit in your book, How Democracies Die, was the sort of counter-narrative of how democracies can survive, how they can fight and stay alive against an authoritarian attempted takeover. Right now, in the midst of this, where we are, what you're going through at Harvard and what we're going through as a country, how do you think we're doing in terms of the fight?
I'm hopeful that we're getting there, Rachel. We've been a little slow to respond. I think in part that's because most Americans don't have any memory or experience of living under authoritarian rule. We don't have the same collective memory of authoritarianism that Brazilians and Argentines and Chileans and South Koreans and Germans have. And so we just don't know how to react. And also, 21st century authoritarianism looks a lot different than old-fashioned authoritarianism. There aren't tanks in the streets. They're not going to be tanks in the streets. These are often elected governments who weaponize the government and use government agencies as weapons to punish rivals. But it's done often in a fairly legalistic manner. And so citizens are often slow to realize what's going on, to realize that they are, in fact, living in an authoritarian situation. But so I think civil society was pretty slow these first few months. There's kind of an expectation that Trump 2.0 would be like Trump 1.0, which from my perspective was pretty bad, but there was a general sense that we muddled through and we'll muddle through again. But this is obviously much worse. But in recent weeks, and what happened at Harvard, I think, is a sign of that, we're beginning to wake up.
Well, let me ask you about the Harvard decision. I feel like Americans all across the country, whether they've got any connection to Harvard or even any connection to higher education at all, I think people have been buoyed by Harvard's decision. It's been described in the national press as potentially the start of a sort of tipping point in terms of the way that people are positing themselves as either acceding to what Trump is doing or willing to fight it. Can you give us any insight into how the decision was made at Harvard? I know you very publicly were part of trying to encourage the institution to take the kind of stance that they did. Can you help us understand how the decision was made and what was compelling to the powers that be there to convince them to take the stand?
Well, I wasn't in the room, so I can only speculate. I think, for one, Harvard's leadership looked at what happened to Columbia. Columbia effectively rolled over and got nothing out of it. All it got was more demands and didn't even get the money released. So that's what happens when you negotiate, make concessions to an authoritarian extortionist. And so Harvard realized that strategy was a dead end. I think also the public debate had begun to shift. As you know very well, the first few months, it's not just an attack on universities, it's an attack on law firms, it's an attack on the media, it's an attack on politicians, on public critics of Trump, foundations, NGOs. And the initial response across the board was, unfortunately, among the most powerful law firms, most powerful billionaires in this country, was to get on their knees. And but the public conversation has begun to shift. People have become very critical of that, and there's been a growing sense, I think, across the country that we need to do better, that we need to respond, we need to get off the sidelines, and that it has to be our most privileged and most powerful civic leaders who do it first. We can't just rely on little old ladies in front of Tesla dealerships. God love them. But those with the power and the resources to withstand the blows have got to take leadership. And that public debate, I think, eventually prevailed at Harvard. In addition, the list of demands was so excessive, so authoritarian, that if Harvard were to accept it, it would have been the end of Harvard as a free university, as an institution, a democratic institution of higher education. We cannot let the federal government dictate what we teach, how we hire, how we admit students, how we treat our students. I mean, it's only in totalitarian regimes do universities allow that.
I got to say, those little old ladies in front of the Tesla dealership, I feel like, A, I wouldn't mess with them, and B, I feel like what they're doing is putting the steel in the spines of a lot of other people who haven't been willing to stand out there in the sleet.
Totally agree.
There is an element of all these decisions being interlinked. We, for example, over the last few days have been tracking efforts that we've been noticing at other universities around the country. Universities making efforts to band together. Senate faculties voting in the Big Ten, to name one example. They're debating and voting on and potentially trying to set up kind of mutual defense compact. I think there's been some discussion about law. Other countries have dealt with this in other times and in other places, other contexts. Can you talk about the value of fighting together, of not fighting alone, and whether or not that makes you not just a bigger target, whether that makes you more effective and more resilient?
It definitely makes you more effective and more resilient, but it's difficult. As you know very well, Rachel, collective action problems are notoriously difficult to overcome because every CEO has to worry about his or her shareholders. Every university president's got to worry about their organization. Every NGO has to worry about being able to pay their staff. And when they get taken on individually, there's a strong incentive to be very pragmatic, to lay low, to not act, to make concessions, to do what is necessary to preserve oneself. The problem is if every individual university, every individual media outlet, every individual CEO, every individual law firm does that, acts out of self-preservation, then our entire civil society ends up on the sideline, and we end up where we've been the last few months. So overcoming that is really tough. One way to do it, the way that we've been recommending, is that society's most prominent and best endowed leaders have to act first. It's got to be precisely the people who got on their knees in December and January should be the people out there leading the way. And I think we're hopeful that Harvard setting this example will in fact empower other people to act collectively. So what happens when we act collectively? They don't have the capacity to punish hundreds. And it's a way of communicating to society that, first of all, that there's a fight on. This isn't a one-way steamroller, but two, that there is a serious crisis that we have to respond to. I mean, we've gotten to the point where even David Brooks is calling on society to rise up in civic mobilization. So, acting collective, universities acting collectively can send a signal to others that it's possible. And it's a way of sharing the risk and sharing the cost so that no individual organization is likely to take such a heavy blow.
Yeah. And there's a lot of sort of elite organizing to be done soon to go to those elites who previously bent the knee, and decided to try to ride this wave to pull them back over to the other side. It's a really, really, really important point. Professor Stephen Levitsky at Harvard, thank you very much. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for being with us tonight, sir. Appreciate it. All right, much more news ahead here tonight. Stay with us. New poll out today from CNBC Heart Research. Do you approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing as president? No, we do not. Donald Trump's overall approval rating underwater by 7 points. That is even lower than it was last month in this same poll when they had him underwater by 4 points. But things get much worse for him when you start asking about Trump's handling of specific issues. Do you approve of Donald Trump's handling of the federal government workforce? No, we do not. By a 9-point margin, we do not approve of his handling of that. Do you approve of Donald Trump's handling of foreign policy? No, we do not, as a country, approve of Donald Trump's handling of foreign policy. By an 11-point margin, we disapprove of him on that. On tariffs, the thing Trump calls the most beautiful word in the English language. Do you approve of Donald Trump's handling of tariffs? No, we do not approve of that by a whopping 16-point margin. On inflation, which is, prices, the issue that arguably did more than anything else to get Donald Trump elected president, do you approve of Donald Trump's handling of prices? No. of inflation? No. Voters disapprove of Trump's handling of inflation by a 23-point margin. The proportion of Americans who disapprove of Trump's handling of inflation is 60%. The proportion who approve it is just 37%. And it's not just this one poll where he's doing so terribly. Another poll this week from The Economist and YouGov shows basically the same thing. That poll has Donald Trump's overall approval rating underwater by 10 points. In that same poll, Americans are asked if they approve or disapprove of Trump's handling of foreign trade, including, i.e., tariffs. Americans say no by a 16-point margin. They disapprove. When voters are asked if they think Trump's tariffs will increase or decrease the prices they pay for the things that they buy, the proportion of Americans who say Trump's tariffs are going to increase the price on stuff they buy is 75%. 3 in 4 Americans think that Trump's policies are deliberately driving up prices. Throughout Donald Trump's entire life as a political figure, the one issue where he has almost always enjoyed, to my mind, inexplicable, but nevertheless net positive support from the American public is on the issue of immigration. But even on that, not anymore. Look at this. A Quinnipiac poll from this month now shows that Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of his signature issue of immigration by a 5-point margin. That's supposed to be his best thing, right? He's underwater on all of it. Trump has been back in office for less than 100 days. The American people are quite disapproving of his agenda. The American people are protesting what he's doing more and more, and he's losing every single day in court on almost everything that gets him into court. How was your Thursday? More ahead. Stay with us.
Safe Flight Repair.
Representatives of the government, I hope to have the chance to actually see Kilmar and see what his condition is.
That was Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen when he was on his way to El Salvador yesterday, saying one of the main goals of his visit was to essentially do a wellness check on this constituent of his that the Trump administration said it mistakenly shipped to El Salvador and then said they couldn't or wouldn't try to get him back. Well, earlier in the show tonight, we had the breaking news that Senator Van Hollen has accomplished at least that stated goal. He was initially turned away from this prison in El Salvador today, but then hours later, the El Salvadoran government arranged for Mr. Abrego Garcia to get out of the prison in order to meet Senator Van Hollen, somewhat bizarrely, in civilian clothes at a hotel in San Salvador. Now, we do not have a sense of what this is going to mean for Mr. Abrego Garcia overall. His lawyer tells us tonight he's just learning this meeting happened from social media like the rest of us are learning it. El Salvador's president just posted online that Mr. Abrego Garcia will now stay in El Salvador's custody. But again, it is the U.S. government that has been ordered by U.S. courts to get Mr. Abrego Garcia back to the United States, so we shall see. We did just obtain this statement from Mr. Abrego Garcia's wife. She says, quote, "My children and my prayers have been answered. The efforts of my family and community in fighting for justice are being heard because I now know that my husband is alive. God is listening and the community is standing strong. We still have so many questions, hopes, and fears. I will continue praying and fighting for Kilmar's return home. Thank you to everyone, including Senator Van Hollen, my CASA family, all our unions, faith leaders, and community for continuing this fight for my family to be reunited." We are just learning about this situation as it unfolds. This hour, we'll bring you whatever new information we get as we get it. Stay with us. This hour feels like it was about 4 seconds long, but apparently it's done. That does it for me tonight. I will see you again tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. Now it is time for The Last Word with the great Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. It was 24 hours ago that we were talking about Chris Van Hollen's mission to El Salvador. And I was thinking actually at the time yesterday, which I've thought every once in a while over the last decades, where would Martin Luther King be today? And when I saw Senator Van Hollen in El Salvador yesterday, I thought that's where he would be at least one day this week, as well as other places, not just there, but around the world where Donald Trump is doing so much harm. And here in the United States. But that was a Martin Luther King-like mission, going to El Salvador the way Senator Van Hollen did, and achieving what he has achieved. Last night at this hour, Rachel, I didn't look into my, guessing section of the brain and think, what's he going to be able to do tomorrow? I just lived, very present tense with it and not knowing. And it's so stunning to see this development tonight with him actually making contact. And I think in the process, proving just how easy it is for an American government official to get access to this particular prisoner and how easy it would be to accompany that prisoner on a flight back to the United States.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I feel like as with all of these things, and as with so much that's going on right now, you don't know in advance what's going to work. And you do a lot of stuff that doesn't work. But the only thing you are guaranteed, the only thing you can definitely know for sure in advance is that if you don't try, it won't work. And Senator Van Hollen down there yesterday, I interviewed him last night. Down there today, we saw him at the prison gates trying to get in and being turned away. But he's there and he's trying and he's doing everything he can. And that's how stuff gets done. That's how the world changes.
And when he files his complete report on this, I'm sure he'll do tomorrow publicly, we're going to know, and the lawyers in the case are going to know, what is involved in getting access to this prisoner. Who facilitates, to use the Supreme Court's word, who facilitates what to get the United States Senator from Maryland into that situation with this person being held as a prisoner in El Salvador? There's a tremendous amount of legally relevant information that Senator Van Hollen now has.
And after that Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruling today, that lyrical 7-page ruling today, most of which I just read live on the air, I mean, there is no ambiguity in terms of the administration's responsibilities here. And it is affirmed by the Supreme Court, it is affirmed by the District Court, and reaffirmed by the District Court, and now affirmed by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in an absolutely salutary ruling. I mean, the legal clarity here now matched by logistical clarity produced by Senator Van Hollen forcing the issue by being there in person. This is how you get things done.
And Rachel, your report on the polling, which I hadn't seen that polling, that is extraordinarily negative polling on Donald Trump, on tariffs, on the economy, his overall approval, disapproval, terrible numbers. But the one about immigration seems relevant to what we're seeing tonight. Donald Trump's now losing on that issue in polling, which has normally been a strong issue for him. And it may very well be. We don't know exactly what's moving those numbers, but it appears that most Americans, a significant, clear majority, do not like seeing people sent off to a prison in El Salvador as a mistake and then watch the President of the United States joke around with another president in the Oval Office about it and how there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things where Donald Trump has historically done very well in polling, and one is on the economy. And right now, his economic polling numbers are absolutely underwater. He is absolutely tanking with the voters in terms of how they view his stewardship of the economy, for obvious reasons. And the other one is immigration. And the way he does best when you ask about Donald Trump and immigration is if you ask a generic big topic question, like, how do you think he's doing on immigration, without getting into the specifics? Even on that, he's underwater on the big topic way that you can phrase that question. But there's other polling that's come out within the last week, which shows that when you go granular, when you ask about the specific policies, the specific things he's doing in terms of going after international students, going after people who don't have criminal records, going after people who have been in this country for more than 10 years, you ask at a granular level, and his polling numbers are absolutely below the floor and dropping fast. I mean, they're terrible. They're as bad as they are for him on anything. And he is just tripling down on this immigration cruelty stuff because he instinctively believes that this is something that people like. And his polling numbers have turned completely around on this subject. And the more the people of this country learn about it, the more horrified they are, the more apparently activated they are to protest against him and resist him and say no to him, but also the more willing they are to tell pollsters that they specifically do not like this, which is the thing he most wants to be known for. And that's just, I mean, when your best stuff is the stuff that's most deeply underwater with voters, start over, man. Start over. Yeah. Different tack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel, thank you so much for that interview with Senator Van Hollen last night. That's really the last we heard from him before this breaking news tonight, and we can't wait to hear from him tomorrow, as I hope we will.
Indeed. Thanks, Lawrence.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you. Well, as you've heard, the breaking news of the night is that Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen has managed to visit the Maryland resident, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, being held in prison in El Salvador in what the Trump administration admits was a mistake. Senator Van Hollen broke the news on Blue Sky, posting, quote, "I said my main goal of this trip was to meet with Kilmar. Tonight, I had that chance. I have called his wife, Jennifer, to pass along his message of love. I look forward."